Hi, Clint.
Hey, Brigid.
Who or what would you say is your personal Mars?
Is there a specific context that I should be answering this in?
It's on site with this person or entity. Like you're sworn enemies from birth to death, cradle to grave.
Okay. Oh, that's not what I was thinking. I was going to answer David Bowie because, that's what comes to mind.
What? How did you take the question?
I took it as, I don't know. I literally had no idea what you were talking about. But
I'm so sorry.
in terms of, somebody who I would choke slam through a table if they showed up, I'm going to have to choose Antonin Scalia.
Oh, my goodness. That's a really good one. I thought you were going to say Michigan.
No, I would say Ohio.
I mean, Ohio. As a Michigander. Ohio.
No. Good guess, though. What about you?
Jeez. I didn't even think of one for myself. I guess it would have to be Arizona.
Okay.
That was one of our best cold opens.
Push the button.
Hello, and welcome to The Mercy of Pods, the world's first and only podcast about the Captives War series by James S.A. Corey. Except today, we will not be discussing the Captives War, nor will we be hitting on one of the Expanse novellas. We've covered 4 of them so far, including the first 3 chronological novellas. Instead, today, we're going to get into the main Expanse storyline with the first few chapters of... Are you ready? Are you ready? Leviathan Wakes.
The main Expanse books are super dense with both text and subtext. There are immediately like a million ships and stations to keep track of, and an equal number of plot threads weaving in and out of each other, so we're going to do our best to clarify and annotate all of the references and ships and planets.
Yeah, we are going to meet several different ships, including the theoretical romantic kind in this episode. But before we start, we may have some new listeners who have maybe just jumped on with us as we are starting the main Expanse narrative. So for those of you who haven't been with us throughout the Captives War, you should read the fucking Captives War, you derelicts, and then go back and listen to all of our episodes about it, because they're very good. And also the Captives War rules. And so I don't know what you're waiting for. Get off your fucking duff and read the books. And B, this is how the Mercy of Pods works. We're going to be going through Leviathan Wakes in chunks, cutting the episode off where it makes sense. One of us will write a summary of the part, and the other person will make witty and urbane comments / dick jokes. The discussion will be all spoilers, all Expanse books, all show. We also may refer to the Captives War or other properties, but we'll try and call it out when we do. But also, don't be a baby about spoilers. Just by way of introduction, she's Brigid. She's an author, reader, queen of chihuahuas, and one of my best friends of all time. And I am Clint. I'm a lawyer who escapes the drudgery of my work with one of 97 different hobbies. This episode, the very first chunk of Leviathan Wakes, is Brigid's turn. B?
Here we go. We start with the prologue, which is titled Julie. When we meet Julie, she's been in a storage locker by herself for 8 days. She had been crewing an OPA transport vessel called the Scopuli when an unknown ship attacked and boarded them. They had wiped their data in case the strangers were there to check their manifest or hunt OPA people, but it didn't matter. They took the whole crew onto their own ship, and Captain Darren didn't say boo. None of the other crew put up a struggle, to her disappointment. Julie fought back, so the invaders or pirates or whoever they are locked her in this suit storage locker. Now Julie is hungry and thirsty and ready to get shot to find out what's going on. The drive has been shut off, she can tell from listening, but the ship still has power, meaning it still has air. Julie calls for help for hours, but no one comes. She finally, after 8 days alone with no food or water, kicks her way through the locker door and searches the ship only to find no one. There's none of the invaders, none of the crew. This is the invaders' ship that she's on now, and they're not there. Her crew's not there. She makes her way to the door to engineering, which is locked from the inside. which doesn't make any sense. Outside the door are signs of a struggle, blood and tools all over the place. Julie blowtorches her way into the engineering deck. She floats through the large space towards the reactor core, which is covered in mud of some sort. Only as she gets closer, she sees that the mud is veined with tubes and pulsing with life like flesh.
Yeah. Good stuff.
Ooh. She gets a little closer, and a finger of the flesh mud comes out towards her. It's Captain Darren's head, and it says, "Help me." Ew.
Very wild. What a disorienting way to begin a narrative. We are thrust into space, but we're also confined into a locker, which feels like an action narrative, or perhaps it's like a sci-fi heist movie. But then as the prologue goes on, you realize that nope, you're in full-on space horror. We get introduced not just to the setting, but also to the mode of storytelling, which is, correct me if I'm wrong, Brigid, third-person limited. Is that right?
That is correct.
Thank you. And we sort of meet the big bad that we're going to be dealing with, at least in this book, in the form of the proto-molecule. And so in this way, the prologue shares a lot of parallels with the opening prologue of a Game of Thrones, and you can see how much George R.R. Martin has influenced our JSAC boys, like, right away. This is how they start the story.
Yeah, this is a great beginning to a story, although as the chapters go on, you wonder, when will we go back to Julie? But right off the bat, it's gross and weird and very scary. It calls to mind like Alien and also The Thing.
Yep.
Which both those really influence the plot. Alien especially influences the whole Expansiverse pretty heavily. Also, if anyone's wondering, scopuli is the plural of scopulus, which is a type of geological feature found on Mars.
I am very interested in this. What is a scopulus?
It's like kind of a little mound, I think.
Huh.
A word way too cool for the thing that it represents.
Yeah. Also, we learn later that this ship that Julie is on is called the Anubis, or the Anubis. But yes.
Yes. And again, that's the ship of the attackers where she finds... She's no longer on the scopuli. She's on a different ship where the attackers have disappeared and this mud thing has just spoken to her. All right. Cut to Chapter 1. An establishing shot of the asteroid belt and outer planets, a formerly inaccessible segment of the solar system full of mineral wealth. Thanks to our old buddy Solomon Epstein, the distant has become near, and thus the 3/4 of a kilometer long fire hydrant-shaped Canterbury had begun its life as a colony transport, taking people out to that belt that was now accessible. Now, the Cant, in the time of this story, is a water hauler, bringing ice from the rings of Saturn to the millions of people who call the outer part of the solar system home. The ring and outer planets, you might call them. And Jim Holden is the Canterbury's executive officer.
Yeah, this is a subtle change from the show where it starts with a different XO who is played by Mike Ehrmantraut from Breaking Bad. Like, just a wild sort of little cameo to put in your story or your show and then not have him appear for the rest of the time. Regardless, in the show, Jim sort of becomes the reluctant XO after Mike Ehrmantraut has a mental breakdown. Book Holden is more openly ambitious about being XO, which I think fits. And we're going to talk a lot about this, but I both love and hate Book Holden much more than the show Holden, quite a bit. I have much stronger feelings about Book Holden than I do about show Holden.
Do you think they did that just to capitalize on Breaking Bad? Like, why did they do this?
I have no idea.
Well, I don't get how it informs his character at all.
The, like, reluctant leader kind of thing. I honestly think that, and, you know, like, for example, we're going to talk about this later, but when we get to the distress call in the show, like, the captain is like, we're just going to forget about the distress call, and show Holden is like, you know, the righteous one who logs it, and so they have to follow up on it. And I think that that's honestly just designed to fill time and make these characters a little bit more interesting because we don't get their interiority. So they've got to have some conflict in like the first episode.
That makes sense. TV writing is beyond my mental capacity. When we catch Jim, he is half listening to his chief engineer, Naomi Nagata.
Yay!
Yeah! She's tall like all Belters, and she's a really good engineer. She's explaining that the Knight, the Canterbury shuttle, has a problem, so it can't go into atmosphere at the moment.
So this bit stands out to me because I don't imagine the Cant or the Knight have many opportunities to go into atmosphere. Like, they don't go to Earth or Mars regularly. We know that. They're just going back and forth from the rings of Saturn to Ceres, and I don't think that there's going to be a lot of opportunities for them to encounter atmosphere. According to like a very weak Google search, the only thing in the solar system that has atmosphere other than the planet is Titan, which is one of Saturn's moons. So maybe that is what the Knight is for?
Naomi says that it's like a safety regulation, so maybe it's like just on the off chance that you need to send people to Titan, I guess. I mean, it seems like they would never... Oh, because maybe just because of the class of ship it is, because it used to be a colony ship, so
yeah,
they'd need a shuttle.
That makes sense.
It's a little weird. I think it's mostly just a set piece to indicate that they have a shuttle called the Knight, and that Naomi is not only competent, but also extremely thorough, and she doesn't leave anything to entropy because she's a Belter, and they have to keep everything in ship shape or they'll die.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
It comes up all the time how prepared and thorough she is, and how she knows like all her tools and all her stuff so well. While Jim and Naomi are discussing the Knight, Naomi's assistant Amos comes on scene. The very first things we learn about Amos is that he's from Earth. He's got big meaty arms, and he considers Naomi, not Holden or the captain, to be his boss, and in fact calls her boss. As Naomi leaves Holden to help Amos with something, Holden thinks about how weird Belters' bodies are. Then he considers going to see his booty call, Ade Tokunbo, but decides first he needs to visit a crew member who was injured. In the infirmary, we meet Shed Garvey, the Canterbury's medic. He's helping a crew member who just lost his arm slinging ice blocks in outer space. The worker is entitled to a really good prosthetic under their medical plan, but not the gel that regrows your arm.
We have figured out interplanetary travel and how to regrow limbs, but we have not figured out how to decouple medical treatment from labor benefits. Suboptimal, folks.
It's not ideal.
Yeah.
That's fine though. The fancy prosthetic is fine because, as Shed tells Holden, there's a period of adjustment to a prosthetic where when you jerk off it feels like someone else is doing it.
Sure.
I think that's such a super just Navy-ish thing to happen. Holden leaves the infirmary satisfied that he's done his exo duty and ready for some snuggles and cuddles with Ade. Holden describes Ade as pettily hedonistic, and I like that phrasing. She has like a little setup so that if the captain wants to talk to her, she finds out in time to look busy. He invites her up to his room for dinner and drinks after their shift ends, but she says she's not up for sex. He makes it weird, and she has to put him down. Their relationship is friends with benefits only. He pushes it, saying for it to work, they have to be more than that, because nothing turns Jim Holden on more than feelings. He even says he will follow her to her next job, which makes her laugh in his face.
This part is so fucking uncomfortable for me because it's shit that I, frankly, used to do to women when I was young and stupid and entitled and thought I was a serial monogamist. It also makes Holden look like a fucking rube, just, following her along like a puppy dog. I assume, and maybe I'm wrong, as a woman, your take on reading this is probably a little bit different, like a little bit more, I don't know, wary.
My take is very similar. He is acting like a rube and also like a fuckboy. It's really uncomfortable and annoying when men won't just take what they're given. They like always want more. If you agree to a date, they want sex. If you agree to sex, they want your heart. Sure. There's always some complex psychosocial dynamic going on instead of just like, do you like me as a person and want to hang out with me? Are we having fun right now? It's like, there's always something going on behind the scenes, and it's just so tiresome. And he's doing exactly this. He's not taking her as a person. He's taking her as like the repository of his hopes and dreams. Yeah,
as like a conquest, as something that he needs to hold on to.
Yeah.
I have this whole theory about Jim Holden as a serial monogamist being sort of like a psychological response to his polygamous upbringing with his parents, but we can get into that later.
Fascinating. I can't wait. Jim then pushes the issue so much that he makes Ade insult him. He says, well, I don't necessarily want to stay on the Cant It's comfortable, but it's full of rejects. And she says basically, so what does it mean about you that you're comfortable there? Doesn't that also make you a reject? And he gets all wounded, and she says, I specifically told you I'm not in the mood, buckaroo. They kiss and make up, and we find out why she puts up with him. He's a really good kisser.
And canonically has a nice ass. Right?
That's true. I think, well, we'll talk about fan casting later. As he's leaving, he gets paged to the bridge by Captain McDowell. Turns out they've intercepted a distress signal, which is terrible news, because according to space law, they must investigate.
All right, so I told you guys I was a lawyer. I'm sorry. Every now and then I'm going to have to do this. But this is identical to maritime law on Earth, which by custom, going back literally to the Code of Hammurabi, and it's now codified in international law, specifically the International Convention for Safety of Life at Sea, which is a fun convention, I imagine. Anyway, it requires a captain of a ship receiving a distress or mayday signal to respond, if at all practical. There is, of course, a notable carve-out to this obligation, which becomes relevant later here, in that you only have to provide assistance if it doesn't put your own crew or ship in serious danger. So this is just a continuation of maritime law going back to antiquity.
I love this type of law. It's kind of the inverse of the hospitality principle, where if a visitor needs food or shelter for the night, you must help them, especially like this is a really strong tradition in places where there's a lot of nomads and in places where people are really poor or the terrain is really rough. And that's all true of space and the sea, too.
That tradition, at least in Greek, it's like the guest right tradition, if we want to talk about thrones. But in Greek, it goes back beyond ancient Greece. But in Greece, it was called xenia. I got a whole thing on guest right. You can talk about that later.
We can talk about it whenever you want. The Canterbury is the only ship within a few million clicks, which for you fellow regular old people like me, that is military slang for kilometers. The distress signal is coming from a ship near a charted asteroid outside the belt. Holden remarks that's kind of a strange place for it to be since there's nothing else out there. Why would it be near this little asteroid that is not relevant to anything? It doesn't matter though. Law and decency require them to stop, loathsome though it may be, to delay their journey. That's why McDowell looped Holden in. Holden, as the XO, can insist on rule following without aggravating the grunts too much. It's ship politics. You wouldn't understand. McDowell tells Ade to figure out how to stop by the asteroid. After giving him some guff, she calculates that they can get there in 2 days with everyone in crash couches and some damage to the interior hull from shifting ice. Super duper. Let's go. Next, the captain checks whether their shuttle the night is good to go. Luckily, Holden had just been told that it wouldn't do atmosphere, but it should be fine for vacuum, which is where the asteroid is. When McDowell asks how he knows, Holden says, because Naomi said so. And McDowell just accepts it. McDowell plans to send Holden and a team in the shuttle, but tells Holden not to be a hero. They had to stop and check, but they didn't have to take any extraordinary measures. Capiche? Holden is not to play hero again. Would love the story on the previous times he played hero.
Yeah, there had to be multiple previous times.
Probably so many. He probably really thinks that he's Captain Kirk, James Tiberius Kirk. Rebecca, the comms officer, says...
Light freighter, Martian registry, shows Eros as a home port, calls itself Scopuli.
Listener, that's the ship Julie was on, the one she got dragged off of. What the heck is going on?
I love this. You mentioned Captain Kirk, and this is a total inversion of the Star Trek trope of the away team getting wiped out while Captain Kirk watches in horror from the safety of the Enterprise. It's the exact opposite of that. It's just fun little...
That is fun. You and listeners may be disappointed in how little Star Trek I've watched, but I know the broad strokes.
Sure.
Guess what? Now it's time. It's Miller time.
It's Miller time. It's your baby girl.
It's my baby girl and yours, Detective Miller.
Yes.
So all the chapters in Leviathan Wakes switch between Miller and Holden, in case the listener is curious about that. Okay. Detective Miller and his partner are interviewing a witness whose diction is so peppered with series slang as to be unintelligible. to Miller's earther partner, Havelock. Miller, in contrast, speaks the slang fluently. The witness is won over. She gives Miller some fairly useful intel and says she'll pass on a message. Miller and Havelock leave the grimy rent hole where the girl has been engaged in the oldest profession.
According to the show, all the brothels on series are union. Good for them.
Yes, there are a few notes about the strength of the unions in this universe, and I'm so excited that capitalism didn't 100% win.
Sure.
They're near the surface, the cheap part of the station where gravity's weak, and Havelock doesn't walk good in low G. He asks if Miller enjoyed shutting the earther out of the belter conversation. Miller says no, he enjoyed shutting the rich guy out of the poor people conversation. Got him. Havelock takes this well because he's a good sport, unlike Miller. Miller grew up in Ceres, the port city of the Belt. He remarks that Tycho Manufacturing had spent half a generation building Ceres Station, and they were still pretty smug about it. Miller is fantastic, and we will be quoting him directly throughout this podcast. Deal with it.
100%.
Miller, or rather the third-person narrator focalized through Miller, describes how Ceres being a busy port city breeds crime and thus has security officers like him and his partner. This is an echo of the description of both Baltimore and Oberon, where it's like, It's a port, it's wealthy because of its, I guess Oberon's not a port, but it's wealthy because of its business connections and thus it's corrupt. And it's so corrupt that it has him and Havelock there as security officers working for Star Helix, the same company that came down on Baltimore in the churn.
Yeah, it becomes really relevant later, pretty early in the book, that Star Helix is an Earth corporation. So the fact that it was in Baltimore 20 years ago makes all the sense in the world. I just am very curious as to wonder how far Star Helix goes back. I imagine it's a fairly old company.
Yeah, I wonder if, like some of the other companies we'll meet later, it's related or inspired by a current corporation.
Yep.
The two of them go back to the combination police station and military garrison. Miller explains to Havelock that the confrontation that they were investigating had looked like a setup designed for the target to fight off and up his street cred, but the target had disappeared afterwards and not come back, which is strange because he worked for Golden Bough, and usually they avenged even their lowest rent purse boys. Miller thinks it's a bad sign if Golden Bough is losing power, whereas Havelock thinks it's positive if there are fewer criminal networks. Miller replies, "Say what you will about organized crime, at least it's organized."
It's big Walter Sobchak energy, like say what you will about the tenets of National Socialism. Love that line.
Me too. He's so funny. Miller gets called up to the boss's office, sans Havelock. She asks him what he's found, and he tells her all three local crime syndicates seem to have undergone market contractions. Strange. She asks if the OPA could be involved, and Miller explains to us that the Outer Planets Alliance is the big bad of Ceres Station. They're the Ceres version of the IRA or Hamas, seen as freedom fighters and saviors by those they help, and insurgents or terrorists by those who get in their way.
It occurs to me just now, Captain Shahid, she's on the OPA payroll, so she knows. The reason she's asking Miller here is to figure out whether Miller knows.
Oh, fascinating.
Yeah.
Goes all the way down. Miller Miller feels the OPA would as soon space Havelock as not. One gets the impression that he doesn't approve of the organization, but he does have like a little moment here where he's like, what are her sympathies? Would she join them? The captain loses interest in the crime syndicate thing and gives Miller his new assignment. Find Juliet Andromeda Mao and return her to her parents, Jules and Mrs. Mao of Mao Kwiatkowski Corporation. Kidnap job, Miller asks, and Captain Shadid confirms. It's a favor for a shareholder, and Miller has no say in the matter. Julie Mao has been involved in an OPA-associated group, and the Maos now want her back. Why now? They didn't say. Miller contemplates his new assignment and its ethical implications. He's a dirty cop. The captain is dirty. The whole station is dirty. Quote, Ceres didn't have laws, it had police.
The show line version of this is one of my favorites. No laws on Ceres, just cops. Excellent stuff. Both versions sort of lay out the state of play for the Belters. There's like no such thing as rule of law or popular sovereignty or a social contract or any of that political sciencey stuff that gets used to justify the state monopoly on violence in more genteel societies, if you will. Instead, in the Belt, it's just sort of naked corporate authoritarianism. They mention a governor of Ceres later, but at least according to Miller and what we see, they don't really govern anything. It's Star Helix that's calling the shots, and then the OPA that calls the shots, and the rules are what they say they are. I want to circle back a little bit and just hit on. Remember, Captain Shadid is an OPA mole in Star Helix, and so it's interesting that she gives him this Julie Mao kidnap job right when he's like starting to poke around and find out about the Golden Bough stuff happening and the OPA maybe, filling that void. It's just a nice subtle plot point where, the OPA mole is like sending Miller off the scent of something that might reveal something for the OPA.
Yeah, that also answers another question that I had, which is why would she send Miller on this job? And it's because she doesn't care if he finds her or not. If he finds her, that's good for the station or whatever, or her, I guess. And if he doesn't, that's good for the OPA. And she doesn't really trust his detective work very much.
Yep.
So Miller is thinking about the ethics of kidnapping a grown woman and sending her home. And he figures it's a frontier where people live on the edge of death all the time. Sometimes that comes with a kind of frontier justice, or at least a moral flexibility. Oh, circling back to the governor thing. So I think it's not anything like the governors of states in the modern world. It's like governors of territories, right? Like someone would be like the governor of like Australia.
Sure.
Or like the Virgin Islands. And they would mostly be making sure that the profiteers didn't get in too much trouble with the locals.
That's 100% right. Yeah.
Miller returns to his hole, the unsettling off-Earth term for apartment. We learn that Miller is divorced and thinks about his ex-wife Candace all the time. There is some tasty texturing of the world here. So like people on Ceres and presumably other stations buy air, right? And they can scent their air as it's pumped into their space. Chief Shadid uses a coffee kind of scent, while Candace, erstwhile Miller, used one called Earth Lily that sounds asthma-inducing.
Yeah.
Miller uses no scent at all because he likes the scent of the recycled air. It reminds him that, quote, the circle of life on Ceres was so small you could see the curve. He liked it that way.
Oh, that line is just a goddamn heater. Like A++ work.
It's quite delicious. This is the line that got me hooked. I read that, took a screenshot, and texted you something about being all in.
Yep, I remember that.
It came up in our time hop. Miller is depicted as a self-hating belter, but he likes the weird moss whiskey, and he likes being buried, as others have put it, and never seeing the sky. The things that made Solomon Epstein feel trapped on Mars make Miller feel secure.
Yeah, I think Miller hates himself not because he's a belter. He just hates himself for normal, depressed shithead reasons. Because he clearly likes being a belter. He's comfortable being a belter.
He probably chose to be a cop despite wanting to help other belters so he'd have a nice concrete reason to hate himself.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Drinking his moss grog, Miller flips through Juliette Mao's file. He pauses on a photo of her having won a pinnace race that is like the space version of America's Cup. Quote, she was grinning like the universe had given her a kiss. So she was so rich she could indulge in this expensive hobby she clearly loved, and yet she chose to leave that behind to fight for belters. He chalks it up to poor little rich girl syndrome and closes the file.
There's also a bit, Steph made me mention this, for obvious reasons. There's a bit where Miller calls her a nerd for putting fear is the mind killer in her notes, which confirms that Dune exists both in this universe, the Expanse universe. Dune also exists, we know this, in the Captives War universe. So that's the one crossover so far, is that Dune happens in both places.
The multiverse is a many-splendored thing.
Mm-hmm.
Miller imagines his wife sitting across from him telling him about her day.
I think you can speed past this part generally, but this part where he imagines his ex-wife is pretty important for Miller's character going forward. His whole thing that we see throughout this book where he imagines Julie everywhere, it's not a thing that happens because he's horny for Julie, even though he clearly is. This thing where he imagines people is just a thing that he does in general, because he does it with Candace. Probably he just does it for his love interests at the time, but he sort of projects them into his life when they're gone. We only see him doing it this once for Candy, but it's there to establish that this is part of Miller's psyche. It's not something that's particularly special to his obsession with Julie. Just like Holden, Miller is a romantic and a monogamist. He just does all of his projection and stuff in an inwardly creepy way, as opposed to Holden's outward anxious attachment.
Anxious attachment is right. I'm so glad you brought this up, though, because this is another fucko thing men do where they're horrible to be with, and then afterward credit you with being their, like, shining beacon of light that changed everything. Sure. And, like, the girl that got away. It's irritating as fuck, because why didn't they just listen while you were together? And if I was so great, why weren't you just a good boyfriend? Clearly unresolved issues for me. Miller also kind of has something in common with Amos here, where they import someone else's morality or judgment for their own. Miller mostly is using it to browbeat himself, whereas Amos uses it for ethical reasoning he can't do without someone else's framework. Miller does have an innate sense of justice and rightness, but he hates himself too much to describe it to himself. It's Candace or it's Julie.
Yeah, there's that conversation that they have later on in the book. Miller and Amos have after Miller whacks Dresden, where Amos is like, "We are the same," and this is sort of a really good way of demonstrating how similar they are. That he's putting Candace, and then eventually he puts Julie as the person who he follows as their moral compass, just like Amos does with Naomi and later Holden and all that.
Yeah, let's keep an eye on that. After he closes the file, he eats a bowl of fake beans, which, please try to imagine a worse food than photocopied beans. While looking out over the foot traffic on his corridor, he sees a sparrow hovering in a way Havelock assured him they couldn't do on Earth, quote unquote. Then he decides the Julie Mao case is small potatoes, and what he really cares about is the disturbance in the organized crime on Ceres. I've got such good news for you, Miller. They are very much connected.
Indeed.
Chapter 3. We return to Jim Holden's point of view. He's thinking odd things about people's bodies and getting ready to launch the night at the distress signal broadcasting scopuli. We meet Alex Kamal, one of the Canterbury's pilots who will be flying the night. Jim finds him too chatty, whereas Naomi enjoys his ebullience. Alex has a Mariner Valley accent, which is to say a Texan accent. Jim finds that annoying too. Immediately after thinking that Naomi is freaky thin, Jim thinks Alex is pretty chubby for a Martian. Dude, don't police people's body shapes like that.
Yeah, the book also notes that even if Alex is pretty chubby for a Martian, he's still thinner than Jim, which, given that I have Stephen Strait in my head for Jim, is hard to picture. Regardless, a lot of body shaming here from our supposed hero, Jim Holden.
Quote unquote hero.
Yeah.
I picture Book Jim as like a big corn-fed boy, kind of like maybe like the guy that played teenage Clark Kent in that first Superman movie, or perhaps like Jesse Plemons with Bruce Campbell's face.
Sure, I can see that.
Thank you for coming with me on this journey.
Mm-hmm.
It does kind of make sense that they note each other's heights a lot, because in a spacesuit, that's like one of the few identifying features. But still, he's always talking about how fat or skinny people are. Amos and Shed round out the 5-person team, and they get permission to launch. Captain McDowell says to be careful, quote, "That shuttle is expensive, and I've always sort of had a thing for Naomi," unquote, which is a wild thing to say about your subordinate, and makes me wonder if McDowell had like a premonition he was about to die and thus was ready to risk it all.
Could be. I mean, no sexual harassment laws on Ceres either. Apparently, just cops.
Ade sets the Canterbury in synchronous orbit with the asteroid, the nearest one gets to stopping in space, and the night launches. The asteroid they're approaching is tiny and alone in orbit around the sun, between Jupiter and the Belt, a place empty even for space. The scopuli rests against the rock, held in place by its weak gravity, the asteroid's weak gravity. We immediately get ghost ship vibes because there's just no reason for the ship to be here by this rock. They hover nearby, and Naomi tells Holden that the ship is who she claims to be. Her drive is shut down, likely manually, because there's no radiation leakage. Holden can see the scopuli visually and with sensors, and he asks Naomi, what is that thing that looks like a big hole in the side? Naomi said, Ladar says it's a hole in the side. This is already weird. They check for any nearby signals or ships and find nothing. No one is around for 20 million kilometers. For my fellow liberal arts graduates, this is 500 times the circumference of Earth.
This may be a good time to mention that one of the enduring themes of The Expanse that strikes me every time I read it is do not go to space. Because among other things, it is just too fucking big. Just don't go.
Just don't go. It's too big. They'll never find you. No one will hear you scream.
Yep.
We may need to eventually do an episode on The Expanse vis-a-vis the Magnus Archives entities, because they're a really cool framework for thinking about horror.
I am not familiar with them at all.
I love making people listen to the Magnus Archives also. Holden decides they should go ahead with checking out the vessel, but be ready to bolt at the slightest sign of anything hinky. This is also super alien coded, because there's always someone who's like, this is a terrible idea, we shouldn't go. And they're always right, because there's always an alien that eats everyone.
Yeah.
Naomi will drive the salvage mech, which is very sexy of her, and the lads will tether onto it. Shed will come along in case there are any survivors. Amos says he wants to bring a gun. Holden pretends to think it's silly, but if the big burly earther mechanic was carrying a gun, it would make him feel better too, quote unquote. I'm obsessed with how people cannot think about Book Amos without mentioning his size.
It's the big man Amos every single time.
Yeah, his big arms, his big hands, his big head. Amos picks a special space gun because a traditional firearm would give him enough recoil to launch right off the asteroid. Everyone checks their own suit and someone else's, which is what did not happen for Anderson Dawes' sister. And off they go. As they're getting to the scopuli, Holden thinks it's kind of sad how ugly all spacecraft are. There should be room for aesthetics. This is because Holden is a romantic with a capital R. The scopula's only damage is the hole in her side, which Amos points out wasn't done by an asteroid or torpedo, but by shaped charges put there to blow a hole in it. The situation makes little sense, but they decide to go in anyway, because Holden always decides to go in anyway. The lads enter through the galley and head to engineering. There is no atmosphere on the ship, which means no survivors. Nothing is disturbed, though, so Amos surmises it wasn't a robbery. He examines the reactor and sees it was shut down correctly, and other than the hole inside, there's no reason the ship couldn't fly, so why hadn't the pirates taken her? They go to the operations deck to find the computer core, which might have some clues. While Amos cuts it out, Holden checks the ship's beacon, which hasn't been activated. So where did the distress signal come from? More questions than answers. Holden sees an odd black box on the deck floor and asks Amos if he thinks it's a bomb. Amos jump scares Holden by grabbing the thing and immediately recognizes it as a transmitter. This is the distress signal they got. Someone had made a fake transmitter and hooked it up to a battery so it would keep transmitting indefinitely. Why? Asks Amos. Why not just use the ship's beacon? Well, because this one must send a second signal triggered when someone found the distress signal, Jim extrapolates.
Good call, Jim. Yeah, The Expanse in general just does such a good job of putting mysteries inside of mysteries inside of mysteries. And the story is like an ever-expanding Russian doll of mysteries. Each time you solve one, it unveils an even bigger mystery, and then it keeps expansing from there. Right? Yeah. So this chapter is just such a good plotting. This is really good plotting for setting up the first and sort of tiniest mystery, which is what the fuck happened to the scopula.
Yeah. Sufficiently creeped, Jim orders the crew to return to the night immediately. That's when McDowell comes in on the radio. Holden, we have a problem.
Hey.
Heyo, we switch back to Miller for chapter 4. You'll notice that the chapters switch points of view, as I mentioned, and each chapter ends on a little cliffhanger, and that's one of the techniques J.S.A uses to make this narrative compelling, even though it's super dense with characters and plot and world building, not to mention the heavy themes and symbols. This is another thing. I mean, George R.R. Martin didn't invent this, but I know he does this too.
Yep.
It's pretty cool. Gets me going. Miller is having some dinner when he gets a call from the Blue Frog, a port bar that caters to non-citizens of Ceres. I have the weirdest typo there that I was like, They're not on it. Anyway, non-citizens of Ceres. The barkeep, who trades favors with Miller, informs the detective that his partner is currently drunk and ready to make a scene. Miller asks the bartender to keep Havelock drinking and distracted until he gets there. He makes the decision to go as a friend rather than a cop by going to the bar on the tube instead of in a police transport. And while on his way, he charms a man and his little daughter. I love all the little ways his character is constructed in his chapters, because this shows he's like charming and good with people.
Yeah, it's a really good point.
He also takes a moment to turn the situation over in his head like a Rubik's Cube, sorting all the facts into order without trying to create a narrative. He does this to put himself on his whole foot, as he says. He goes into the Blue Frog and uses his most apologetic face to cut through the crowd to Havelock. They make small talk, and Miller asks if a ship came in. Havelock tells him it's corporate security rotating out of Eros. The company is Protogen, he thinks.
This is big foreshadowing, because we know from later in the book that Protogen has been training up the Golden Bow Boys on Eros for the past 2 weeks, and now they backed off. So we are now a couple of weeks out from the Eros incident beginning.
Right. The Protogen, the real security guys from Protogen have left Eros.
Right.
And now it's just Golden Bow Boys and Loca Griga boys and stuff.
Yep.
So then Miller gets to the point with Havelock. Picking fights with Belters won't make their captain or the other cops like him any better. There's a tragic moment where Havelock tries to storm out of the bar, but he can't properly storm in the low G. Miller gets him out of the bar and into the public corridor, and they walk together, Havelock complaining about the anti-Earther bias in the belt. Miller notices a news feed that announces communication problems at Phoebe Science Station, among other less plot-relevant items.
Yeah, this is the first hint, I think, that Phoebe Station is important. I love the, Havelock complaining about anti-Earther bias. It's like, yeah, you're the boot that is standing on everyone's neck here, and in at least 2 different ways, but whatever. I also like this part because Miller is like, whoops, they stole glasses from the Blue Frog, and then they don't bring it back, and they just go.
Yeah, classic drunk move. Havelock's anger deflates, and they decide to go to a different bar, a cop bar. Miller lists the other companies whose agents drink there: Star Helix, Protogen, and Pinkwater, which the eagle-eyed reader will notice is a merger of the Pinkerton union-busting concern and the Blackwater insurgent-murdering concern of contemporary geopolitics.
Great call, perhaps the most obvious corporate merger of all time.
If they didn't already have that idea upon reading this, they would have, and it's probably in the works right now.
Sure.
At this bar, Miller takes on a slightly macho affect and says it was just as much a pose as his obsequiousness had been at the Blue Frog. He and Havelock talk about his new assignment, and Havelock questions the ethics of kidnapping an adult. Miller avoids the discomfort of the question by not deflecting or getting defensive, but accepting that it's unethical. He says, "I told you it was a bullshit job." Miller has a beer, exalting again the richness of Belter fermentation, which, again, every other character hates, including many other Belters.
Right.
While they are drinking and talking shop with other cops, Miller gets a notification, and then everyone else in the bar gets the same notification from their superior officer. The one he gets is Captain Shadid ordering him and Havelock back to the station due to an emergency situation, which is that a video broadcast has been relayed throughout the belt, unencrypted and likely to go viral in the next 5 minutes. She forwards the message, and an Earther appears on screen. Early 30s, pasty, blue eyes, dark hair. Miller thinks he looks shocked and angry. "My name," the man said, "is James Holden." Oh shit, what did Holden do now?
Probably trying to be a hero again.
Frickin' heroics, always. This Dudley Do-Right, I tell you what. Chapter 5. Holden and his merry band of pranksters are speeding back to the Canterbury at 2 Gs, giving themselves headaches in their haste. McDowell's seen something strange and wants to skedaddle. Alex offers Holden the juice. It's a cocktail of medications that allow humans to travel at high G-forces without passing out or having a stroke. They can get back to the camp faster by moving at speeds that require it. He doesn't want to have to do that unless they have to.
So the Knight doesn't have an Epstein, right? I think it says it has a torch drive, and which is like maybe weird, maybe not, because like Solomon Epstein's yacht we covered Drive a couple of episodes ago wasn't very big. It was probably about the size of the Knight, but if I recall correctly, later they say that the Rosie is about the smallest ship that you would put an Epstein on. So, like, maybe the commercially produced Epsteins that we are getting at this period of time are bigger than the prototype that killed Saul.
Well, don't you think the Knight is probably a lot smaller than the Rosie also, though?
Oh, yeah, for sure. That's what I mean. Is like,
oh, yeah.
As I understand it, like, you wouldn't put an Epstein on the Knight because it's too small.
Yeah. Oh, but maybe... Well, I think probably Solomon didn't know how he wouldn't have put that powerful of an engine on his own yacht either.
Right. Yes. It's probably not a good idea. Is what we can take from that. Yes.
This kills the crab. Yes. Also, maybe just Pure and Clean is a typical cheapskate corporation. They're like, what's the least we can get away with?
Probably.
Holden takes a painkiller tab from his spacesuit and checks out some readings that Becca and McDowell sent him. They show a spot 200,000 kilometers from the Canterbury that undergoes a 2-degree temperature climb. Holden marvels at Becca's extreme competence in spotting such a small, distant fluctuation and asks where that came from. Becca says it's not causing a radar ping, so it could be a gas cloud, but how did a gas cloud get out here? It's not from the Scopuli fighting back because she didn't. This uncertainty is why the Knight is speeding back to Canterbury so they can all nope out of there. Jim asks Naomi what could be invisible to scopes but still increase in temperature. Naomi reckons it could be stealth technology absorbing sensor energy and expelling it as heat. Just as she says it, Alex reads a massive infrared spike on their own ship's sensors. Holden contacts McDowell, who informs him that a ship has just appeared where their hotspot was. It's smaller than its heat signature at frigate-sized. Holden tells McDowell Naomi's theory about stealth tech. They must be hiding because they're up to no good. That's when 6 new objects show up on the radar, moving fast in the Canterbury's direction. They have 8 minutes until the torpedoes hit.
This book does not fuck around with getting to the action. We are 5 chapters in, and bam, space torpedoes.
Yeah, we're just right into the operatics. McDowell assumes it's pirates. Jim asks what he can do. McDowell says, shut up and sit tight, you're too far away to help. Everyone starts talking over the comms on the Knight. Alex immediately wants to go on the juice and race the torpedoes to the cant. Naomi starts talking about missile jamming strategies, while Amos is, quote, cursing at the stealth ship and questioning the parenting of its crew. Shed doesn't say anything. Holden tells them all to shut up or get off comms and then get back to the cant as fast as humanly possible. Naomi connects herself, Holden, and Becca to one communications link. Becca is trying her best to scramble the targeting laser and torpedoes, but the enemy's technology is the good shit. They still don't know who the attacker is. Naomi suggests dropping snow, and Jim tunes them out and calls Ade. He's about to say something inadvisable to her when Naomi asks her his input on a plan he hasn't been listening to. She wants to use the Knight to draw the missiles using some kind of broadcast frequency mirroring. She explains it to Jim like he's 5. They can outrun the missiles until they're past the cant, and then hide behind an asteroid, which Jim says won't work and is too risky.
Yeah, I am a Naomi stan, and I love her ingenuity, but this plan would basically be like, kill us instead of the cant, which, okay, trolley problem sort of makes sense, but the difference is that they think that at this point, everyone on the cant and the Knight thinks that these torpedoes are just sort of regular ones that are designed to like disable a ship like the cant, not the nukes that they are. And the like 3/4 of a kilometer long Canterbury could theoretically withstand 6 strategically placed missiles, but a tiny little ship with like the Knight would get fucking obliterated if they got hit. So Jim is right here that this is a bad plan that Naomi is suggesting.
I feel like later in the series, when we get more of Naomi's backstory, it becomes clear why. Like, she hasn't saved the universe very many times yet thus far, right. And she still feels she has red in her ledger.
That's a really good point. Yeah.
They only have 8 minutes, and there's nothing they can do. They decide to just get close enough to help survivors. Jim demands that Ade keep her channel to him open so he can know she's all right. She acquiesces but doesn't say anything over the line. He's so needy. A dozen needles to the back of the neck deliver the juice to Holden's bloodstream through membranes in his suit. They hit high G's, and Holden is plastered to his captain's chair, his balls crushed to his leg, his eyeballs screaming in pain. They're burning fuel at a high rate, but it won't matter if they can get to the Canterbury. Over the open channel, Jim hears McDowell order Ade to turn on the Epstein drive, even though in their current situation it will tear the drive right off the mounts. He says, do it anyway, we're about to die, and so she does, and there's a horrible sound of the drive tearing itself off its mounts. Down a drive, all they have is maneuvering thrusters. The missiles are going to hit them. McDowell orders Jim to hide behind the asteroid and call for help, but otherwise all the Knight can do is bear witness. Alex halts the high-G burn and sets them back towards the asteroid while wishing for a couple of tubes or a nice keel-mounted railgun. Alex, I have good news for you in a few chapters.
I giggled when I read that bit. Yeah.
Holden turns down the volume on his connection to Ade Holden turns the volume on his connection to Ade all the way up and listens to her counting down to impact.
It says, quote, the Canterbury shuddered and the monitor went white. Ade took one sharp intake of breath, which cut off as the radio broke up.
The Knight slows back down and Jim asks Alex for a report.
My God.
I was hoping you would do the Alex.
They nuked her. They nuked the Cant. I don't know if that's Texas.
That was fantastic. I don't care what it is.
I think I'm gonna just do him like
I'm your Huckleberry.
Doc Holliday from
yes! That's what it was giving.
That's something I can sort of do.
Yeah.
So he's Doc Holliday. No.
That's perfect. Jim demands, and then when you do Naomi, it'll be like Oliver Twist.
Sure.
Jim demands more information because his sensors are overloaded, and Alex says, mine too, but I can see the Cant visually, and she is but a cloud of vapor. Holden is like, that doesn't make sense. Why would anyone do that? Holden decides to take McDowell's order to bear witness to its logical extreme and prepare a broadcast to get the story out because 50 of his crewmates were just murdered. Luckily, the Knight got lucky. That's poor phrasing. The Knight got lucky and its sensor arrays weren't blown out by the radiation blast.
So, liberal arts major here, but I did see an interesting Reddit discussion recently on the Expanse Reddit about why in the Expanse there are fireballs in space, since you usually need oxygen for fire. And I, read the whole thread and understood maybe half of it. But the upshot was that even if there isn't technically a fireball, and I guess there can be under certain circumstances, there would still be radiation and shockwave blasts as well as debris fields and whatnot. So, yeah, that's what they're experiencing right now.
Crazy. Unfortunately, we do sometimes have to know about physics for this series. It's just part of it.
I know.
Makes me so sad.
Tough.
I didn't want to learn anything, but here I am. Holden can see the ship that shot down the Cant tootling off sunward. He insists he is not scared, just angry, and he sends an ill-advised voice memo to whomever is in the attacking ship. He sends them the entire crew manifest and tells them to read it and think about what they've done. They respond by painting the Knight with a targeting laser.
It's like, excuse me, sir. How dare you? You should be ashamed of yourselves.
He's slapping them with his glove.
You rapscallions.
You dastardly villains.
This is the first of many extremely stupid and reckless things Holden does as captain. Just like, what the fuck are you doing? What does he think is going to happen?
Like, they're obviously only alive because the enemy didn't know they were there.
Right. Oh, or they did, but, well, they're painting you with a targeting laser, right?
So now they know.
So now they know, right?
Ugh, he's so stupid. Holden realizes he fucked up, which, to his credit, he does often realize that he fucked up.
That's true.
The enemy ship waits a second and then turns off the laser and continues on. Naomi, awoken from the chemical sleep used for non-essential crew during high G, confirms the Canterbury is gone. Amos and Shed are awake too. Their reactions show their characters neatly. Amos is super mad and clenching his fists while his face flashes red and white, while Shed collapses to the floor and remarks that Cameron's not going to get his fancy robotic arm now. Naomi, for her part, reacts by assessing the situation and getting very clear about what needs to be done. Jim, now in charge, needs to take control. Look at me. You're the captain now. She asks him for orders. She asks him for orders.
I got that. I didn't get that joke until.
Wow. Holden says he wants to blow them out of the sky, but they have no weapons.
Yeah. I'm going to blow them out of the sky with just the power of my words and logic.
My mighty rhetoric.
Go get them, boys.
So they will follow the enemy, figure out who and what they are, and blow up their spot. Tell everybody. Amos loudly agrees, and Naomi is like, why don't you boys go downstairs? Amos, you put Shed to bed with tranquilizers if necessary. Amos loves manhandling people, so he hoists Shed off to the crew quarters, and Naomi puts her foot down with Jim. We are not going Ahab on this white whale, Jimmy. We're calling for help and doing what help tells us to do. Holden starts to protest when Naomi says, if you're captain, then I'm XO, and as your XO, I'm telling you, you're being an idiot. Quote, when we're safe, then you can go on your crusade, sir. Unquote. This is one of many tasty, delicious hero speeches from Naomi Nagata, greatest hero in science fiction.
And she's 100% right. This would be an insane and ridiculous plan. If he actually ordered Alex to follow the ship, she would be entirely in her rights to shoot him in the head rather than do that.
Yes.
Literally. Like, this would get them killed. If he is begging to get the knight killed, it's just bananas.
Like, I'm not exaggerating that this would be a Captain Ahab move. Like, you cannot. No, Jim. No. The juice hangover starts to hit Holden, and to his credit, he realizes he is being an idiot. He tells Naomi he's glad she's there, and that he has one last order to follow for McDowell, but she should go below decks. Holden prepares a broadcast package following the order to bear witness. Sort of. Alex tells Holden he's never seen pirates with stealth tech like the attackers had, only Martian Navy ships. Plus, how would random pirates get nuclear torpedoes? You're saying Mars did this, Jim asks? Well, not necessarily. Well, whoa there, partner, says Alex. Hey. Not necessarily. If Mars has this tech, you know Earth was at least working on it. Holden retrieves the transmitter they found in the scapulae, which had been, as we all remember clearly, been used to send the SOS signal instead of the Scop's own transmitter. He takes it apart, and Alex shows him the bottom of the battery. It's stamped, Martian Congressional Republican Navy. Holden completes his broadcast package with a video message. He faces the camera and says to the entire solar system, my name is James Holden, and my ship, the Canterbury, was destroyed by a warship with stealth technology and what appears to be parts stamped with Martian Navy serial numbers. Data stream to follow. End quote. Oh, Jim, what have you done?
Jim has done exactly what Protogen wanted Jim to do. Protogen could not have found a better rube to carry out what they hoped that he would carry out than James fucking Holden.
Would this be that political science term, a useful idiot?
Yeah. I don't know if that's a political science term, but yes.
Well, I think it's specifically, I mean, of course, we all know useful idiots, but I think it's specifically, I don't know, I'll have to look at the Wikipedia. I'll put it in the show notes that I've never once looked at. Let's discuss.
All right, so that's where we're stopping off for today, right?
Yeah, that already was, boy, is there a lot of plot in these dang books. It's so hard to compress.
Yeah, it really is.
So on first read, where were you at this point?
Okay, so this is going to be interesting to keep track of. So we didn't talk about this at the start. I have read and reread The Expanse several times, but I was show only through like season 5 of the show. And then in between season 5 and 6, I read all of the books that were available at that time, including Leviathan Wakes, which was released like, I think, a couple of weeks before season 6 of the show. Excuse me, Leviathan Falls.
Oh.
So I read all of the books, and then after the show finished, I reread them a bunch of times, and like it's my favorite sci-fi of all time. I love The Expanse with all my heart, and we're going to talk about all of the ways or reasons why that is. But because Brigid is one of my favorite people ever, I bullied her into reading all of the Expanse books last year, and so, as I understand it, and correct me if I'm wrong, Brigid, you were book first and then show throughout, but like at the same time, right?
Yes, I read the whole first book and then started the show while reading the other books so that I could see the big moment with Miller and Julie. And then I kept watching the show while reading the books, but I stayed ahead of the show in the books.
That makes sense. That would be, I think, if I were going to recommend anybody do both, that would be how I would suggest they do it, because the show is great. The show is
Yeah.
fantastic, and it's not like Game of Thrones where the show immediately starts taking wild departures from the books. And I know our friend Ash just like read all of the books without seeing any of the show, and then like a month later we had to remind her like there is a show, and so she has gone back to watch the show.
There's a show with hot people on it.
Right. So I'd be very interested for folks who are listening where, if you were book only at this point or at any point, what you were thinking versus because when I read this the first time, I had seen the show a couple of times, and on my first read through, I remember being a little surprised and maybe even a little irritated at the sort of Holden Miller book structure, rather than sort of broadening the POV structure that they do in the later books. I was like, I'm a Avasarala stan, and I'm like, where is Christian? I need my daily Christian Avasarala.
Oh, that's right, because she's there right away in the first season.
Yeah, exactly. She's right there, and so we don't get her in book 2, and so that gave me blue balls about that, of course. But also that sort of broad POV structure was what I was used to as a Thrones fan, and the reason I got started with the Expanse is because someone pitched it to me as Thrones in space, which it kind of is, and it kind of isn't in some very important ways that we'll touch on later. We'll try not to talk about Thrones too much, but the first time I read this book was the first time I was also exposed to J.S.A.'s prose, and I was immediately just blown away by its quality. The line that we hit on, the circle of life is so short you can see the curve, just spectacular. And as good as the first season of the show is, you can't beat prose like that and the detail that they put in is just great.
Yeah, I am really glad I read the books, at least the first book, before getting into the show, because I found just the plot of this book pretty hard to grasp the first read through. And there's even more plot packed into the first season of the show because it has part of the second book in it too. Yep. And I tried to watch this TV show. I watched one episode of the TV show before I started the books and just was like, I will never understand what's going on here. But with the books, it's like, I love this ping pong structure because it makes me read really fast because I want to go back to the other person and be like, wait, what's going on with that? And I also love detective noir and that kind of genre fiction where it's like, the mystery is going to get solved, but how it gets solved and even what the mystery is sometimes just keeps you page turning. And I loved how Miller was like subverting these tropes as well as troping the tropes.
Yeah.
And I love Aliens, so I was like, when's that thing coming back? That thing from the prologue.
Yeah, I will tell you that when I was show only, I would watch the show. I think I started watching the show and a few seasons were out, and so I would like watch an episode and then I would like find an explainer as to what the fuck happened on that episode and read the explainer, and then I would watch the next episode because as you're right, there's a lot going on. It's very dense and it's hard if you don't have the book background for folks who watch the show. My wife Teresa and I would watch the show together after I had seen it, and she was just peppering me with questions throughout the entire time, and it's just like, yeah, that makes sense. So you mentioned noir, and this is where I want to talk the parallels with Thrones, because in my mind it's Leviathan Wakes, the connections between A Song of Ice and Fire and The Expanse are the strongest. As I mentioned earlier, both stories start with a punchy prologue of someone who dies, and we're exposed to a supernatural-esque existential threat. And then the story quickly moves on to what boils down to a whodunit in the first book. And it's in a genre setting, and the whodunit has only sort of like a tenuous connection to the big bad of it all that we learned about to start, because the meat of both stories are about politics. And both books, if you read them, are in third-person point of view, third-person limited point of view. Both books, the first book of Game of Thrones, have a main character noir-coded detective who dies in the end. They're not similar people, but both Josephus Miller and Ned Stark serve the same purpose for the broader stories going forward, with the groundwork that gets laid in book one. And both stories mostly leave off the noir-esque stuff behind after book one and focus then on the broader political mysteries going forward. And so, like, this is where, in my mind, there's, these parallel story structures that are the strongest. And then after that, we get a lot of differences. And, there's a lot of differences even in the first books, but you can see where Dan Abraham's connection with George R. R. Martin kind of flows into the story. And, like we said, not that Martin was the first person to do this kind of story, but it's impossible to deny the similarities and influence when you read both stories.
Yes, that is such an interesting thing to say about the whodunit and detective aspect of Ned Stark, because you almost never see historical procedurals.
Yeah.
Or whodunits, because that method of thinking was not invented until the Enlightenment.
Yeah.
And it's totally true that he's like trying to put together, like, policing. There weren't police in, I mean, Game of Thrones is set in a fictional place, not Earth. But when we had similar technology on Earth as they have in Game of Thrones, no like electrical engines or firearms or printing press, there was no policing either. There was like magistrates where you would come to them and be like, he beat me up and I want him to pay me money. And the magistrate would be like, that seems like something you do. There wasn't like investigations. There wasn't, I mean, there might be like witnesses that you would call in front of the magistrate, but there weren't detectives.
Sure.
And that's because no one had invented thinking rationally yet.
Yes. That's right.
It was all just vibes. Like, that's why someone like, well, this was post Enlightenment, but like Lizzie Borden famously did not get convicted because they were like, a woman would never kill someone with an axe.
Sure.
Anywho.
Yeah, but like Ned Stark is trying to solve the mystery of who killed John Arryn, and it leads to broader mysteries, right? Like, and it just sort of spirals from there.
Yeah.
Miller is trying to figure out, where's Julie Mao, and then it just leads to broader mysteries, and it sort of spirals out from there. It's a good plot device to like build a story from the ground up.
Yes, it is an amazing plot device to have this sort of outsider dig into all the conspiracies that are going on behind the scenes, is having this like urgent mystery that needs to be solved. And they're interesting. I don't connect them mentally. Like you said, they're very different characters, but that's a cool parallel.
Yeah. They also have two of my favorite actors in the show versions.
Yeah.
That fucking nailed the role.
Yeah.
So let's talk the show.
Yeah.
Book versus show for this part. This is basically episode 1 of the show, right?
Yeah.
Plus, in the show, we got Avasarala and, a bunch of the UN stuff. So I think the major difference, book versus show, and we should say, JSAC were heavily involved in the show, and that's why it tracks so closely. This is one of the most faithful adaptations I've ever seen of anything done ever, especially a story, especially, like a 9-book series, given the last, forgetting about the last 3 books. They do a really good job of sticking to the source material, and you understand why and how they do that, because JSAC were executive producers, and they did the whole, like they were involved deeply throughout.
Yeah.
But I think the major difference, and, we've talked about this a little bit before, but maybe we can talk about it a little bit again, is that, the major difference, book versus show, especially at this stage of the game, is just the bodies. We talked about the body structure throughout this episode. In the books, the Belters are tall and skinny, and there's this whole thing as to whether or not they're actually human, given or I think that the phrase is post-human.
Yeah, like, are they another species? Because their bodies...
Exactly. Yeah, and we don't get a whole lot of that in the show.
No.
And so what do you think? What do you think about that?
I don't know how they would have been able to do it in the show, but it definitely does take away something from that political conflict between Belters, Martians, and Earthers, because there's no way, like, if you're a Martian or the size of a Martian, you can kind of pass either way. But this is a society, like a super society, I guess, like a huge society, where there's a subclass of people who are considered maybe not even human, and they cannot possibly blend in with the oppressor class. Like their bodies will not blend in with an earther. Like you'd never mistake a belter for an earther. And that is very parallel to certain situations here on Earth that I think are relevant. And I think that aspect of belters makes that analogy even more poignant in the books. And sometimes in the show, I think that the politics of the belter situation kind of get lost. Or people are able to ignore it because it's like, I don't know, they look like Marcos Inaros.
Right. I mean, that's a great person to point out, is like, he looks straight out of, central casting of, he's a beautiful man, gorgeous person, but like, he's not different in any way than James Holden, right? Like he's the same kind of person. And Stephen Strait is, kind of skinny and not like, as you point out, he's not a beefy boy. So I will say, when I first watched the show, I remember talking to our friend Timmy, who was a big Expanse fan, huge, massive Expanse fan. And he was saying, he explained the difference, that there was that the belters' bodies were like tall and long. And I remember thinking like, well, that's uncomfortable. And I don't like that. And I'm not sure I would enjoy that.
Yeah.
But when you read it and you see what it does, and you see how they work it into the story as an analog for exactly what you pointed out, real world ways in which people are set apart and thought of as less than human or different than us because they don't look the same way.
Yeah.
And, that's obviously what they're going for here. So we don't get that as much in the show. And that is to its detriment, for sure.
There's other smaller changes that are of more or less utility. But yeah, like, do you think it means anything that it's Holden logging the distress call, or that Miller has a different love interest? What's that about?
So in the show, like, there's the other detective that wants to bone Miller.
Oh, I do vaguely remember that.
She shows up like right away.
Yeah. That's right.
I think it's Moss. I think that's her name in both the book and the show.
Oh yeah.
In the book, she's just the replacement for Havelock, who thinks that Miller's a piece of shit. But in the show, she's like, she wants to jump his bones.
Yeah.
I think it's just TV writing. They gotta, gives people love interests and like make people have, sort of minor conflicts to solve on an episodic basis that you don't have to do in a book.
That's true.
Also, Ade is white in the show.
That's so weird.
I'm wondering if it's a situation where they were like, we don't want to have a person of color actress get fridged immediately in the way that, people say.
I will tell you exactly why they did that, because they knew that white American audiences wouldn't be able to tell Ade and Naomi apart, and they'd be like, I thought she died.
Oh, you are absolutely correct. Yes, that is correct.
Whenever you're confused about why an American or America in general does something, it is racism.
Yeah, that's probably right.
I also, okay, I'm sorry, I'm just going to hyperfixate on Amos through this whole podcast. Just getting it out there. I'm always going to be talking about Amos.
Everybody loves Amos.
Everybody does love Amos. He's handsome in the show, and he's very ugly in the books. And maybe that doesn't matter, but I do think his being, like, I think him being kind of ugly or not remarkable looking other than his size is a big part of his personality, actually. Like, in the books, he is always kind of doing that amiable smile to be, like, a little less threatening. Like, if, like, a good-looking guy, even if he's really big, doesn't have to try that hard to be non-threatening. But if Amos doesn't want to call attention to how violent he's able to be, he has to do that little smile and kind of, like, shrink himself. And I think they take really good advantage of Wes Chatham being good-looking in the show, not only for our viewing pleasure, but also, like, as the character. Like, he doesn't act like an ugly person when he's not. But, yeah, I would love to see this with big, ugly, bald, fat Amos someday.
Well, I don't think, and you're the Amos stan, right? I don't think that Amos, thinks of himself as ugly, or at least Amos has no body shame, right? Like
No, he doesn't feel ashamed of his ugliness, but he also knows
Right.
he's not good looking.
I'm sure he does, but like he doesn't care because he's the
No, it's
least self-conscious person in the history of the universe.
yeah. I just think I mean, maybe ugly is not the right word, but he's aware that he's not what's considered attractive, or that women aren't attracted to him or whatever, or that people look at him with a certain revulsion that he has to, like, if he wants them to not notice him, he has to do certain things. But no, I don't think he's like, I'm so ugly, like Frankenstein's monster or something. I think it's more just like awareness of where that puts him on in the social milieu.
That makes sense. I mean, we're drawing a comparison between Amos and Miller. Miller, by contrast, I think is very aware of how people look at him.
Very much so, yeah.
Very self-conscious about it. And he uses that to his advantage. You pointed out a couple of times, even in this episode, where he sort of uses his personality to make people like him. And that's something that is very relatable. But he's doing that in sort of a projection way. He's projecting a vision of himself that changes based on the setting that he finds himself in.
Yeah.
Because he is very self-conscious and very aware of how people view him.
Yes. I agree. I think that Miller and Amos both use their like personal affect as a tool. And I don't think Miller thinks of himself as ugly at all. And he probably isn't ugly at all. But Miller has more range, basically. Like, he has different affects he can take out, whereas Amos has fight and amiable smile. And he just has to use either of those. But no, I don't think, like, it's more that I think, like, Miller also probably is aware of how, like, what doors his face can unlock for him and what they can't, I guess.
That's probably true. You want to talk about foreshadowing?
Nope.
No?
Well, I didn't write anything down, so I guess not.
Well, okay, so I did. So.
Oh yeah, let's talk about your thing though.
Okay, so we're going to talk about foreshadowing. We hit on, some foreshadowing that we got in this episode about Protogen and about the Golden Bough and the Loca Greca and the sort of like plot elements of foreshadowing.
Yeah.
But I want to talk about big picture. Let's talk about the name of this book.
Yes.
Which is Leviathan Wakes. If folks didn't know, it's Leviathan Wakes. So, this is a thing that did not occur to me until my fourth or fifth read through, like last year, is I think the first time it occurred to me, which is insane because I literally teach political philosophy to high school students every year. Anyway, so when people think of Leviathan in the context of the Expanse, I think, and most of the time, people associate the Leviathan in Leviathan Wakes and the Leviathan in Leviathan Falls with this sort of biblical Leviathan, which is like a sea serpent demon which arises from the deep to sow chaos and discord. And also in the Gnostic gospel, which we know from the writer's notes in Memories Legion that Dan Abraham is a fan of, the Leviathan wraps itself around the world to sort of stop materialistic souls from entering the kingdom of heaven. It absorbs the souls as they come up from the mortal plane and stops them from entering the kingdom of heaven. And this vision sort of works because the rest of the book names in this series are similar mythological beings or references to antiquity. And so, like, I think it makes a lot of sense that people would think of Leviathan in this sense as the biblical way. However, Leviathan has another primary meaning in the Western popular culture, and that is, as I mentioned, political philosophy. That is my boy, Tommy Hobbes. He's not my boy. It's actually an enormous piece of shit, but he was hugely influential in writing The Leviathan. It's a completely batshit piece of political philosophy from the 17th century, and I'm not going to get into too far depth, but the basic point that is relevant to this discussion here is that Hobbes posits that the best form of government is an all-powerful king who derives his sovereignty and therefore his power from, wait for it, the collective will and consciousness of all of his subjects. So if you've seen the cover of the Leviathan, Google it, or look in the show notes. I'll link it in the show notes. It's a big king looking over the world, and the king is made up of a bunch of people, like a huge Voltron, with the entirety of his polity making up his literal person. Now,
Oh, it's scary.
the Leviathan in the Expanse context is the protomolecule builders, the Romans. The protomolecule is the tool that awakens them from the deep slumber of eons, and we see that happening in this book. But eventually, once we get to the final trilogy, we know that the Romans were, in essence, a hive mind of all-powerful beings which derive their power from, wait for it, the collective will and consciousness of their entire species. And in the end, in Leviathan Falls and Tiamat's Wrath, Duarte is literally trying to become a Hobbesian Leviathan in the very literal sense. He's trying to become the personification of everyone in his entire human race connected as the collective consciousness. So in a lot of ways, this interpretation of the Leviathan, the Thomas Hobbes interpretation of the Leviathan, is more on point, in my view, than the biblical one. Of course, both ideas come from the same initial inspiration. Thomas Hobbes was drawing from the Bible, obviously. So the similarities aren't accidental, but my God, when this thought hit me, I was so giddy and so angry that it didn't occur to me before, because, again, I teach Thomas Hobbes to high school kids. Listeners that don't know, it's fine, but like I teach civics and political philosophy every year to high school kids, and we cover Thomas Hobbes all the time. And I cover the Leviathan. I have a whole spiel on the Leviathan. I have a whole spiel about how the Leviathan is different than the social contract from Rousseau and the Second Treatise on Civil Government. And none of that shit matters. But I was like, fuck, it's Thomas Hobbes Leviathan that these guys are talking about in a lot of ways. And god damn it, JSAC, these guys are good. That's what I'm saying.
It's really embarrassing for you.
I was really upset with myself that I did not put that together until...
I didn't either, because I don't know anything at all, but that's not true. I know a lot of things, but I know way more about the Bible than I do about the social contract or political philosophy. And the Leviathan in the Bible comes out during the end times. It's a revelation creature. And that fits so well, I didn't investigate any further.
Yeah, no, and that makes sense. And, you know, the idea of like the Leviathan wrapping itself around the world and absorbing the souls, like that's, you know, basically what the protomolecule.
Metal.
But just like Duarte is a Hobbesian Leviathan. That is like a thing that sticks with me, and then he falls at the end.
That's so crazy. Okay, this is probably, I don't know if either of us knows this, but why did he name the king made up of all the people after the biblical sea monster?
Because of this idea of absorbing the power, absorbing the souls, I think.
Oh, okay.
I will have to go back and check that. Come back next week, folks, while I give this whole speech again. Speaking of things that are confusing, Brigid, let's talk about plot density. Because the first time I read this and the first time I watch the show, every single time, and it's been a bunch, I always forget how Julie got to the Anubis. And I always have a moment of confusion as to who is shooting the cant.
Yes.
Did that happen to you again?
Of course.
Yeah.
Every time I hear the name Anubis, like later on, I'm like, who the fuck is that?
Yeah.
And then remember that it's Julie's ship. It's not her ship. It's the ship where she got taken to. And then in the show, adding in Avasarala, oh man, I can't take it. My books are very simple plot for this reason.
The books that you write.
The books that I write, yes. The books I read are always confusing like this.
Like the Bible.
Yeah. And Russian literature, which is, maybe that'll be my next podcast.
Well, I think that was it. I think that was a first good episode. Do you want to say anything else about this?
Nope. Brain's totally empty.
So next time it'll be me, and I think we're going to get up to the point where the Donnie blows. So I think that's the goal. If you like this, follow us on Buzzsprout or wherever you get your podcast. You can also send us an email at themercyofpods@gmail.com or follow us on the socials at themercyofpods. We're putting up old episodes on YouTube these days, and we're on Reddit and Threads and Instagram and I don't know, something else. Our logo is by Matt House. The music is Push the Button by Sid Luscious in the Pants, available wherever you get your music.
Goodbye.
Push the button.